So I'm going to start the webinar. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ilana Brindane, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this wonderful opportunity. And I want to welcome not only our speakers, but also welcome everybody that's tuned in to listen to us today. I am the CEO of the Noor Foundation, a beautiful private museum in Cape Town, in Steenberg in Cape Town. And we are a non-for-profit with a strong focus on art from the continent, modern and contemporary, and also with a strong focus on sculpture, because we have a beautiful sculpture garden. I'm also honored to be a member of the Harvard Center for African Studies African Advisory Board, and it's my pleasure to be here and host this webinar today. The Harvard Center for African Studies, in collaboration with the African CDC, are hosting these weekly webinars intended to provide an accurate depiction of COVID-19 in Africa, as well as to connect us with Africans and the diaspora on issues that are affecting all of us. Some housekeeping rules is each webinar will begin with an update on the COVID-19 statistics that Liming will add for us on the screen, and the African continent, and it's Africa and COVID by numbers. It's a slide that you saw in the beginning of the webinar. And then after we've heard from our wonderful speakers, we will open the floor for questions via the Q&A function on Zoom. Please add your question so you can answer them, that you can ask these questions for the panelists. And please remember to make them concise, as we are going to read them directly from this Q&A function. Liming will also launch a poll for us that they do weekly, a poll that we try and learn from one another. There's a statement, and the statement you can either strongly agree or disagree. And it's a way of also, just like I say, to learn from one another and to gauge how we all feel about our world. So I think what is amazing for me is I think all of our worlds have been turned and disrupted upside down. All of us, including our wonderful artists, our musicians, our dancers, and all creatives. But as in the case of all great challenges, we know that it also provides great inspiration. And so this webinar is a way for us to connect and to learn from one another and to see how we make sense of all of this and how us navigate through all of this, and to make sure that, you know, we don't lose the connection that is so strong to learn from one another. I think as the new normal and the knock-on effects of the new normal is actually moving into our society more and more, it's nice to connect with our peers and our industry leaders, and to find new ways, new models, and new networks. And so today we have 5 wonderful panelists from the continent to help us go through you know, some of the issues that we've had feared and what we've worked on through this past 7-8 months. And I'd like to introduce our panelists first. Liming, I just wanted to ask, do you want us to leave the poll up for a while? I was not sure if you want to keep it on or announce it earlier on, or do we give some time for it to just stay on screen?
No, we can give them an opportunity to see, to do the poll.
Okay, fantastic. So our speakers today is first and foremost Michael Armitage. Michael is a Kenyan artist who investigates politics and the cultural history of East Africa. He was born and he grew up in Nairobi, and after studying at the Slade School of Art and then the Royal Academy of School in the UK, he now divides his time between Kenya and London, where he also has a studio. Michael's paintings have been catching the eye of the major museums in the world, and critics and of course collectors. And we were very proud at the Noor Foundation that we, on the 8th of February, actually opened one of Michael's exhibitions, Accomplish, which unfortunately we had to, because of the lockdown, close, and very few of our audience saw the work at that time. Then we have the wonderful Janine Gaëlle Dieudji. She's exhibition director of the Museum of African Contemporary Art, Maaden, or Macau, an independent, not-for-profit contemporary art museum dedicated to the promotion of African art based in Marrakech in Morocco. Janine is by national French and Cameroonian. She graduated Cultural and International Relations from the Lyon University in France. She also holds a master's degree in political science from Paris Panthéon-Assas University. Then the wonderful Gabrielle, a multidisciplinary artist based in South Africa. She's a real gender advocate. Gabrielle is known for her conceptually distilled and sensitive negotiations and on complex social concerns, particularly in relation to situations of gender and sexuality violence. Their work is featured in numerous exhibitions and key galleries and museums. She's won prestigious awards. She's currently busy with a PhD at the University of Cape Town. And then Nwagbogu is the founder and director of African Artists Foundation in Lagos, Nigeria. Azu is also the director of Lagos Photo, one of my favorite festivals in the world. It's an annual international photo festival that he founded in 2010. Additionally, Azu is the director of Art Base Africa, an online journal focusing on contemporary art from Africa and its diaspora. He is a collector and he advises other private collectors. He has curated numerous exhibitions internationally and he contributes text to several publications. And then last but not least, we have Shaquille Chulaki. He is an artist and printmaker from my hometown, Cape Town. He has recently completed his undergrad degree at Michaelis School of Fine Art. Shakil majored in the medium of printmaking during his 3rd and 4th year of study, and he interrogates the dynamic intimacy using the space of Secret Garden to explore dualities of tenderness, desire, and violence. His experiences as a queer brown man remain central to his practice, with classical Eastern standing as prominent source of inspiration. So it's wonderful to have all of you here, and welcome again. And so across the globe and across our continent, all of us organizations and individuals, we have been tasked with rapidly creating new approaches, creating new models, finding new ways of communicating and operating and serving our audiences with actually very limited resources. So today I would like to start with Michael, because we're going to look at two ways of two lenses when we look at how COVID has influenced all of us. I think the first one for all of us was rethinking and reimagining the physical space, because all of us was affected in that way, but then also to think of how the pandemic has shifted and made artists rethink their practices. And Michael, I want to start with you because you actually touched on it earlier. You are the founder of the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute, which is this wonderful new non-for-profit that you were planning to open earlier this year. And the idea was to tell the stories of East Africa and to acknowledge the artists in that area. And I understood that there was a physical space, but then because of COVID and the reality, you had to shift it offsite, and you created a program and facilitated exhibitions and talks and even a residency through this without physical walls. So I'd love to touch on how did you move without opening the space and then immediately have to go onto a offsite. We would like to hear what your thoughts were and how did it plan out.
Thanks, Ilana. Thanks for having me as well to be part of this. Yeah, so we were set to open our space in April this year with a retrospective exhibition of Nwagbogu, a painter from Nairobi, who's based in Nairobi. Alas, the reason we all find ourselves here, kicked in, and we couldn't open. So then we were left with the question, so, beyond a website, what are we? We want to be an institute that serves our community, and not only artists and those people who are interested in art, but the wider community that at the end of the day is who we were hoping to reach as an arts institute. And so our first step was then, to get in touch with a couple different organizations, one being in classical music and the other being in health, and find out ways that we could help, where we ended up doing a fundraiser through a lithograph that I had made in order to support arts through ourselves, classical music charity and health, and kind of take on what we were thinking would be our, maybe more as a concept, would be our responsibility, but de facto of not having a physical space, we ended up functioning conceptually. The other thing that was important was to actually try and do some sort of exhibition and exist somehow. And we embarked on this series of films where we're making short, at the moment they're 5-minute films, but we've got quite a lot of filming and interviews around that on some of the older generation of artists. Then as I was, alongside that, I was working towards an exhibition at the Haus der Kunst in Munich, and an opportunity came up to take on one of their biggest spaces. So I thought this would also be an opportunity to do something with Nkai, and one of our off-site programs that we were wanting to start. We then set out to make a show that looked at figurative painting from the 1960s to the 1990s to early 2000s through the eyes of six kind of major figures in the East African scene. That gave us the opportunity to then try and borrow work from different German collections. And as it turns out, for example, the World Culture Museum in Frankfurt have 130 paintings by Jack Katarakawe. It's literally impossible to do a Jack retrospective show without their collection. And not only that, there are a lot of other, both private and institutional collections around Germany that have exceptional kind of holdings of East African artists' work, and something that you can't really find in Kenya. And so it became this opportunity for us to begin relationships as Nkai with those institutions in the hope of working together going forward. The show then had the opportunity to travel and will be shown at the Royal Academy in London, which again, we're going to take the same idea, where we're going to work with local collections, local to the UK that is, to try and do an equivalent show with the same artists, but the local collections, and build this narrative of collecting where work has left Kenya and hasn't been preserved, but has gone to this wider collecting community. Then we're going to take the show, when hopefully we open at the beginning of next year, back to Nairobi, and actually do have the physical space open and begin putting on shows. But yeah, we've been just trying to think both how to work within Nairobi at this time and also beyond. And part of our thing is also our archive and creating a level of scholarship. So we're also commissioning different essays on some of the artists to go alongside, and we'll be putting together a publication at the end of this. So we're doing basically all the different elements, with the exception of having a physical space in Nairobi. We're trying to get everything else happening.
Michael, so, and the audience that you were planning to have there, so it's actually now a hybrid. It's people from everywhere that is actually your audience. It wasn't where it was before, you were thought that it was for Nairobi. It's now been much broader. Is that true because of the...
Yeah. To be honest, like I couldn't imagine for Nkai to be successful, it depends on its relationship with other institutions and other people. It depends on our collaborations. We don't have a collection. We don't have this history behind us of this institute, you know. So we're really starting from scratch and are agile and lightweight, which has served us well at the moment. But that said, you know, we do come from a legacy particularly in Kenya, of artist-run spaces, which have formed the backbone of contemporary art and the structures in which artists have been able to both make and exhibit and be supported, you know, within East Africa. The majority of those spaces have been artist-run, or certainly started by artists. So like that, I feel like we're in kind of we have a lot of company and a lot of people to draw upon and really try and make something out of.
And your own practice, have you? I mean, could you access your studio at the time in London, or have you been?
A lot of time at the kitchen table. I think you know, doing drawings and working on lithographs. Definite scale shift when I couldn't get out and about. But recently, I've been able to get into the studio, which has been, I think, a relief for both me and my partner. You know, but yeah, so able to work. But I think one of the questions that keeps coming up as an artist is, you know, how does one respond and try and consider this situation within your practice? And I think, in all honesty, I think it's a little bit of an unfair pressure and thing to have to take on, because it is so big and the effects of it will be so long, and it's very difficult to have a kind of considered sense of the situation while we're all within it.
Exactly. I mean, it's so layered that I actually think we are putting too much you know, responsibility on an artist to actually respond so quickly to it. So I actually agree, because I've also noticed that a lot of our artists say that I actually have to give me time. So I can understand that. So I actually, you know, so also thinking about, you know, this whole shift of, you know, going virtual, and I was watching Janine and McCall, and Janine, as the exhibition director, you're still closed, but you were very clever in the way that you also rethought to how to reach your audience. I mean, I even watched some of your films being screened online, and I followed the virtual conversations. I was very interested in going behind the footage of the galleries, because I haven't visited you, I'm sad to say, but I thought I had a very unique view and angles, and how I suppose even would not have seen if I was there in person. So you were very clever in the way that you almost made it accessible. And one of my questions to you was, you know, I think it's amazing, but do you think that we maybe put too much ambition or pressure on ourselves with this new way of reaching new audiences through the virtual world? I mean, it's suddenly everybody has shifted to that, and so I was wondering how you felt the engagement were, and have you learned anything from, you know, moving so fast into presenting your program online?
Yeah, I think as everyone as like other institution, we just got caught with it, because we opened our last exhibition on February 23rd, and we had to close it 3 weeks, not even 3 weeks, 2 weeks after. And we took a few weeks to understand, like everyone, what was going on and how to adapt and how to shift and how to be present and how to engage with our audience. And it wasn't that easy actually to put it together, because we also had to think, because we live in Morocco, and I think, and also to respond to your question, that shift to engaging online with our audience, it's very good. I mean, I also love what Novel did during the pandemic, during the lockdown, and I really loved their 60 seconds of art. and we did webinars and takeover, and I managed to find a videographer to shoot the exhibition, because we did actually the virtual too during the lockdown. So, and I used to work with students for that kind of exercise, that kind of thing. And it was also for us a way to keep this kind of collaboration with them, because many people found themselves, especially independent people, found themselves without any income. So we showed the guided tour of the exhibition during the lockdown. And but what's, I think it was a good way that all the institutions all over the world did that kind of shift, like reinforce the online presence. But I also think at the same time it's good because we managed to have a broad audience. So not only the person coming to the museum and experiencing the museum physically, but having a global platform. But at the same time, living in Morocco, this online presence also create another gap, because not everyone has access to internet or to a computer, or not everyone speaks English, while at the museum we have guided tour in Derija, we have guided tour in French and in English, while online we choose to do everything in French or in English, even what we're doing now. So I think it's a good way that the institution managed to to expand their field of actions and to reinforce their presence online. But we also have to think how to remain faithful and how to remain connected to our local audience. And that's also why in our last newsletter, I asked to the audience, what do you think we can improve? Because I think we did amazing things, but I think there's still room for improvement for all of us, actually. Because I think the challenge now it's really to create virtual inclusive institutions.
So I mean, we had the same issues, because we went all blazing out to be virtual, and we're always very much aware of the barriers that make people not visit us, where they say art is not for them, and access or connectivity is also a barrier. And even though you want to do a children's program, most of the children in South Africa do not have connectivity, they do not have Wi-Fi, they do not have data. So we had the same issues, and we had to pull ourselves back, and that unrealistic expectation of wow, we're going to do this. And so we had exactly the same issues, and how the pandemic had us rethink what is barriers.
Yes, and I assume in South Africa, like in Morocco, like even to organize a tour of the museum for kids, for schools or non-profit association, as we do all year long when the museum is open, that's the kind of thing we cannot do online. Also because, as you pointed out, even if all the programs we've been doing online, we try to make it for like all audiences and all public. But for us, for example, our educational program, we have to go find our local audience. They don't come to the museum. We really have to educate and really go to the source and have engage the discussion with the schools, with the association. And that's something you cannot do online. So, and I think now we have to reflect and think on how we can manage to engage with that specific audience online too. And that's also why the physical, like having a physical museum is important, so we cannot only cling to that, to the virtual presence.
Absolutely. So, I mean, one of the very interesting models that popped up here even before the lockdown was a group exhibition called Apartment Volume 1 and Volume 2. it was actually during the Cape Town Art Fair, and it was kind of seen as a new model, a collaborative space. And I mean, we all know how important that is. That was held in the inner city here in Cape Town. It kind of explored that intersection between a living space and contemporary art. It was quite a unique showroom and a domestic environment. So it was, you actually entered a home, and it was only by appointment for both established and also emerging artists. And Shaquille Chulaki, you were one of the artists who were featured in this exhibition, and I'm very keen to hear how did you decide to be part of that kind of new model of exhibiting your art?
I mean, for me, it was more a question of being approached and being asked if I'd like to be a part of the show. And I thought the concept was really fascinating, kind of bringing, like you said, the domestic in, well, yeah, kind of mixing, I guess, yeah, a lot of very fine pieces of work with a really clean, beautiful domestic space. And I thought quite the charm of it is, I guess, majority of artworks that we see around us don't always go to kind of, you know, important collections or museums or anything like that. They go to someone's home, to a domestic space. And I thought just kind of there was a really nice intersection there between kind of these two worlds. And also, yeah, I thought it was really fascinating, just the way the whole show was curated. And it's also quite humbling as well, because they've got kind of a lot of emerging artists like myself alongside, I mean, a lot more established names. So it's really quite exciting to be a part of something like that.
And did the pandemic, I mean, could you physically enter your studio? Could you go on with your practice, or were that interrupted?
So, sorry. I mean, I guess the charm of lockdown has been that at the start of the year, I didn't really know what I'd be doing, you know, kind of post Michaelis, and the plan was to be applying for residencies this year, which pretty much all fell through. So I've kind of just cleared out a spare room at home, and I've been working from there. And I guess as a printmaker, as a print major from last year, it was quite daunting to kind of carve out a new sort of space. I mean, I guess I have worked with paint before, and I do enjoy it, but it's kind of something I've really had to kind of dig into now. And I think it's actually been quite a formative experience, which I've really quite enjoyed. I mean, it's been a really, really productive past couple of months. So yeah, in terms of that, I can't really complain.
Okay, that's wonderful to hear. I must say, I took note when I heard lots of the collectors and patrons in Cape Town were actually visiting the apartment exhibition because they felt it was quite safe. They were, you know, on their own there. They made an appointment, and they didn't do that with galleries at that point in time. So I was very interested, you know, seeing that people felt safe going to the kind of more of a domestic environment, which was interesting to see. So thank you for sharing that with us. And then you know, Azu, you know, one of the things that I've loved about you, and always doing our Lagos Photo Festival this time of the year, and I see that your festival is actually planned to go on the 24th of October, and I was wondering, is it all shifted completely to the virtual space? And I also saw that you had a central theme this year, which you called the Home Museum, which I found it sounded very interesting, and so I would love to hear from you. What does that entail?
Thank you, Alana. Thank you for inviting me on the panel. I'm really excited about the turn of events since COVID. I think before COVID, I got super interested in the idea of restitution as a concept. And I really didn't just want to get into it without adequately researching the topic, doing a lot of groundwork around understanding the modality of it, the parameters around which we can accelerate the conversation. And so I invited Dr. Clementine Dillis, who had worked as a museum director in an ethnographic museum in Frankfurt. And one of the most important museums, actually, in terms of holding a lot of these sequestered African art objects from, centuries before now. And we came down to Lagos. We traveled around the country and Nigeria, visiting a lot of municipal museums and trying to understand the question of restitution. And this was done in February. And by March, we now had the lockdown, or the COVID situation really kicked in. So in that period, we began to interrogate how we could create or remediate the conversation, or create a side road into having an opening or ventilating the conversation around restitution. And then we came up with the idea of the home museum, and a way to sort of build a humble way to build the idea and to drop the seed of the idea amongst Africans, local people, international people. Just a way of sharing the concept of restitution, or the concept of your cosmology in your own home. And so I was really interested to hear Solanki's exhibition. I hadn't actually heard about it until now, but and so we decided that Lagos Photo this year, due to the COVID situation, we wanted it to become a more democratic intervention, whereby anyone and everyone could photograph, make 6 to 12 photographs of any object at all that they consider to be what we call objects of virtue, objects that hold a certain memory importance for you, and to build your own museum from the inside out. And so that's the idea for Lagos Photo this year, a way of sort of sparking the conversation around restitution of African objects, but from within, within a side road into the conversation. And I think the photography has the power to remediate or to create a possible solution or side road towards this more complex conversation, as it is done with contemporary art and helping a lot of contemporary artists get visibility with their work through social networks. I thought we could also use that same sort of parameter to begin to build the notion of restitution, or the idea. So we call it a rapid response restitution. And you don't need to have a fancy camera. You don't need to have too many skills as a photographer. With your smartphone, make these objects. If I went to Michael's home and I said, Michael, listen, we need to leave the country right now. We're going to Japan and we're going to be there for 10 years. Well, Michael will pick out 6 to 12 objects that mean nothing to me, and yes. You pick out, and those are the things that are really interesting to us. Those objects, it might be a spoon, it might be a plaque, and that's your home museum. And I thought the idea of museology, future museology for the continent, needs to be accelerated from within. And having worked with collections from when I did the show in Berlin, where I am right now, with the Hamburger Bahnhof, and when I did the show at working with collections in South Africa, I began to think about the idea of collection and what collections really mean, and how is it that we have great artists make work, and we never have those works on the continent. And so these are some of the ideas I really fused and synthesized to create the idea for the whole museum for Lagos Photo 20.
So how are you going to virtually show it? Is it going to be on a website, or how are you going to show this heirlooms and in these homes? How are you going to?
Very important. So we're working with an artist collective called Birds of Knowledge, and these are artists from all over the world, from New Zealand, Cameroon, Lagos, Nigeria. So the Birds are building an online platform. The architecture of the whole museum is actually online, and we're going to hold your museum, your collection on this platform online. It's going to be called the Home Museum.
That's fantastic. I love that whole idea. So it's actually amazing how COVID has, also revealed things that are within us, and reminded us of what we've forgotten. So I absolutely love the way that you've actually and made the heirloom inside very important. I think it's a very interesting concept. And then last but not least, Gabrielle Goliath has gained recognition for her work and performance projects on gender-based and sexual-based violence. One of the powerful exhibitions that I saw in 2019, This Song Is For You, was this audio and visual collaboration between artists and survivors of rape. And the work is a collection of dedicated cover songs chosen by the survivors of rape, with a sonic disruption, and each song recurring this rapture, recalling like a broken record, like a vinyl being scratched. Gabrielle, what's been interesting for me is, your practice comes from a childhood trauma that impacted you profoundly and has influenced your work. And, just thinking of, trauma and the effect and how we all have to process this, and what Michael was saying earlier, like we need some time to process it. I was wondering if you think that COVID and this trauma that all of us are experiencing is affecting you to think differently about your practice. Are you forced to reevaluate it? How do you see this process that we all rely so heavily on the artists to feel for us? How do you make sense of all of this now?
Thanks, Alana, and thanks for having me on the panel. I think, if anything, what the current moment serves to show us is how, and this I locate specifically within the particular thematics of my own work, and that being that really violence, as structural, as endemic, as systemic, is our norm. It is not a crisis. So I really, for me, in this time, I think it's important that we pay very careful attention to our language and the way in which we attend to this moment. I think specifically of how, if we hone in on gender-based violence and how it is spoken of as the shadow pandemic, or our own President Ramaphosa in South Africa speaking of it as a second pandemic, is something I myself take issue with, because it's not a phenomenon that's just popped out of this year 2020. It's something deeply, intimately entangled with social catastrophes such as slavery, colonialism, and apartheid that continues to shape our contemporary moment. So I think for me it's really important to then attend to the moment now in a way where it's not unprecedented. I understand the impulse to speak of it as such now, and I am empathetic towards it. But if anything, what this moment of COVID-19 and the pandemic has served to show us is that, as I said, the crisis is the norm. And if anything, if we think about how these kinds of structural forms of violences play out along lines of difference, is just thrown into sharper relief. It's just exacerbated by the moment of the pandemic. So if anything, and if I think of my own work and the way in which I approach my work, I, by choice, am not prolific. And I choose to commit and invest long periods of time of research and reading and writing and speaking to others and engaging in conversation with others before even making the work. And so this moment for me and how I respond to it is not that different, and that I continue to do that work of research and engaging with others and attending to, I think, what is very key, the specificities of each and every individual's experience in this moment, and the site from where they speak and are experiencing this particular moment, which it really differs for each and every single one of us in such radical ways. So, yes.
Because I mean, one of the interesting ways is when I was thinking about your work, I mean, I always think the power of your work for me lies in that it unsettles me and it encourages me to you know, think and have conversations about the issues that, you know, you bring to the foreground. And also, I think it reveals always the strength of and the resilience of humanity. But then when you read and you say, are we ever going back to a normal? Then I think of your work and I think, but do I want to go back to normal? You know, so there's all these things that go up and down in our minds, and it's such a you know, I think what's amazing that does come out of it is, like you said, the conversations, the collaboration, you know, the fact that it is disrupted all of our thoughts and the way that we have the ability to you know, relook at the way we see things. And also, I wanted to ask you, were your practice, could you and were you in studio as well, or would you know, did you mostly do research during this time?
Well, during hard lockdown, right up in the beginning of the year in South Africa, movement was very restricted and limited, so I couldn't access my studio space. But I'm very blessed to have space in my home, even though I live with many of my family members. I'm able to work here. And but that being said, I think it's been a time of adapting and responding to the moment and finding ways in which to work, and at times returning to those rudiments of one's practice, and thinking about the ways in which one can make in this moment. And with and through those restrictions that have attended the pandemic and lockdown.
And was there any of your projects that you had to put on hold during this time, or was there exhibitions that was put on hold?
Yes, absolutely. So for some of those institutions that where their funding was affected, some of those opportunities would have fallen through completely. For those institutions who were fortunate and could defer funds or hold on to them for the next year, those are still carrying on. But I've been really fortunate in the sense that I still have work showing now where museums have reopened, and those shows are ongoing, and that's been extraordinary. And I think if anything, as this moment presents so much different kinds of opportunity, if we start to think about how we can work within the virtual and the physical spaces, I think that as the museums and galleries reopen, it's a really beautiful moment, because then I have people reaching out to me and reminding me of that experience and of how my work calls for that kind of gathering to and coming to a work. So yes.
I have to tell you, we were all very excited when we were physically back in the museum and we were actually seeing work and seeing texture, seeing, even if there was, you know, logistical problems, or we absolutely, I think we all need to see the work. So as much as I respect the fact that we will have a virtual and a way of engaging physically with going forward, and I suppose all of us will put more focus on the virtual world as well. It has been amazing to be physically back in the space and seeing scale and medium, because one of the things that I've noticed, and maybe it's one of the last questions before we take some Q&As from our audience, was I actually thought that the commercial art world was very quick to move online, and the auction houses, and of course one can criticize it and look at it, and you know, like somebody was saying, you know, they think that work that translates better on screen is sometimes chosen. but I sometimes feel like, especially us as a non-for-profit world, you know, that was something we left behind. And learning from that, the notion that I take, or the ideas that I take from COVID, is that I would like to run, you know, different ways of communicating and thinking about ways of communicating. And my takeaway is that we should constantly create that content too, like you were saying, you know, find that opportunity. And so one of my last questions to all of you is, Michael, maybe you can start. What is the one thing that you, as a takeaway from these few months, that stays, you know, top of mind for you, and each of you? You're on mute, Michael. You just have to unmute. Yeah.
Great. How's that?
That's perfect.
I also seem to have acquired a doppelganger, or just a shadow with my name on it. So I don't know what happened there, but anyway.
Oh, there I see.
Yeah. But anyhow, yeah. At the moment, I'm finding that a very difficult question in all honesty, to be able to answer. But there is something that Gabrielle just said, which I think is really important to have in mind beyond a situation like this, which is to do with something like violence and, you know, the distortion and trauma that does cause to an individual. That it's important to recognize that is actually something that is present, and that is what many people live through, you know, daily. And not only that, in places where there is a high kind of presence of violence in daily life, that there is also a pressure of thought and attitude to situations that is shifted and changed by that. And I feel like the thing that's easy in a situation like this, where there has been light, certainly in certain parts of the world, shone on domestic violence, seeing as there's so much light, you know, going towards the domestic life, as that's where everyone is at the moment, is just to recognize that goes beyond, you know. And I'm just basically, all I'm saying is to echo what Gabrielle says, and because I think that's her point was so important that I think it really needs to be kept in mind.
Yeah, I agree. Janine?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I was so concentrated and listening to Michael. Could you please repeat the question?
I'm just thinking about, you know, what's your takeaway, you know, your top takeaway from this past few months, you know, the lesson you've learned almost.
And yeah, I completely agree with Michael and Gabrielle, actually, because at the end of the day, we are living a traumatic experience, and we still processing it. And for me, I think I'm really happy with how Gaëlle and Novel and other museums managed to, you know, to reposition themselves in this very complicated time. And I think what my take on this is, yes, we did amazing webinars, we did amazing virtual guided tour, and we engaged through our social medias and everything. And for me, I think what I think is, we just realize, you know, the virtual, first of all, cannot replace the physical experience. And what is important today is to combine both of these experience to, you know, to keep building an authentic and especially an inclusive experience, way of experiencing museum. And as Azu was talking about the museum from home, because I really love this way, the way Edouard Glissant defines museum has a place where the world is in contact with the world, actually. And so kind of the pandemic allowed us to create that kind of spider web, you know, to connect with all the parts, look, with everyone in the world, even the panel we're having in this very moment, and that we wouldn't think about a few months ago, apart of thinking, oh, we have to fly Lana, we have to fly Janine, Michael, and Azu to the US to have this kind of panel. So now we have to think how to combine both experience, the virtual and the physical one, and keep you know, including audiences in the way we think our programs.
Very nice, thank you. Shakil, your takeaway?
To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure if it's that much of a takeaway. I mean, I think if anything, and I think across all boards, it's just more appreciation for those I have around me. But I think what I've really enjoyed seeing in the past few months is how many artists are using their platforms to help others auctioning off artworks, and just kind of a lot of social action in that way, which I think is really important. I mean, your work doesn't necessarily have to speak to these social issues, but if it can at least somehow provide some sort of aid to those in need, I think that's really, really powerful. And it's something I've really, really enjoyed seeing from a lot of artists within Cape Town, at least. And I guess within my own work itself, just being so productive in this time, I've had a surplus of works. And I mean, there's only so much you can do with that. You might as well do something worthwhile instead of, you know, just selling it for yourself. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's my takeaway.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Azu?
Thank you. I think I like Gabrielle's point a lot about violence. I think we've inherited a lot of institutional violence, and we step into the role as sort of participants in industry. And so it's so easy to recreate and ventilate and distribute that sort of institutional violence in our roles. And I think I really have to pay a lot of tribute to people like Michael, and my brother, Ibrahim Mahama, for what they've done through using their platforms to create opportunities to recognize artists who've come before them, giving them a platform to really be heard and be seen and to be venerated. I think that's a very, very important part of redressing all of the sort of situations that we've inherited, because, you know, I think one of the things about contemporary art is that we love to stay relevant in the situation we find ourselves. And I love the opportunity to turn that on its head, you know, to learn new ways of doing things. And I think in this sort of pause that we're in through COVID, and I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but I think there's a genuine opportunity to embrace a collaborative approach where we stop saying things like institutions don't do it like that, or museums don't operate like that. That sort of nonsense that we just rehash because people have been saying it to you for years, you know, or like, you know, inviting an artist to live and work in your museum. Why can't you do that? Why is that such a strange thing to do? So I just feel like if the consciousness of that embodiment of violence around us, the awareness of it is such an important thing. And also the fact that, you know, just breathing toxic air around you can create an illness. It means that we should be aware of, use that as a sort of metaphor to be aware of the embodiment, the environment and the energy, the violence that are just around us, to think of new ways, more humble ways, more engaging ways to collaborate. Having said that, Janine, I will do the Instagram takeover at some point.
Thank you very much.
I will do it. And of course, we'll make ourselves available where possible. But that's sort of my takeaway. I think it's a real, genuine effort to make this happen.
I think it's very important, Azu. I agree with you that collaborative spirit is going to be the one thing that is going to make us survive, you know, and I think we need to embrace that. And Gabrielle, is there one last thing on you? I can't not listen to you the last little bit before we go to this question for Azu, actually.
I'm sorry, I'm very mindful of everyone's time and that their questions. I will say that what I have to say resonates with what everyone has just said now. And I'll just share something. I attended this most extraordinary talk that was given by a trans activist. And they very keenly drew my attention to, or at least I should say, reminded me of the work of community. And they spoke to how, when they were speaking about how we speak of this time now of social distancing and self-isolation, and that is their norm predating this pandemic, for example. And in that moment, I was reminded of how, when I think of what everyone has just said now, I know that it can ring so hollow when we talk about the ethics of care and radical love and the radical work of the decolonial gesture. But I think now is the time to begin to revisit those impulses and begin to really think about how we can start to really put them to work. And I think, as we was picking up on, and I absolutely agree with that, we always place so much emphasis on mass reach. But I think now and even beyond, when we move back into physical spaces and intimacy, intimate spaces, intimate conversational moments, there's also space for that to happen within small, intimate, communal spaces as well. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very lovely. Thank you. So I see there's a question, Azu. There's a question specifically directed at you. Azu, you touched on the future of museumology in Africa. Do you have any examples of where you are starting to see this take shape on the continent? You kind of touched on that.
I mean, I think when we talk about building the museum inside out, when we talk about building the architecture of the museum, typically you want to build a museum the traditional vainglorious way is you get a famous architect, you come to the incredible building that everyone loves and everyone thinks is amazing. And then we think, what are we going to put in that building? Then we start worrying about the collection. I think the idea of building from inside out is what people like Gabrielle, Michael, Solanki are doing, where you nurture ideas. And then you think, how do I house this on the continent? Building it from inside out. You look back at artists who had inspired you as a young, up-and-coming student even, and think, wow, people need to see how great this and how incredible and how immense his work is. And it's about humility, humble spaces. So the word future museology is happening as we speak. This is an opportunity. I think the SCCA in Accra, in Tamale, is a museum. It doesn't need to have, the song and dance and all of the vanity and the attractions and the excess that we associate with museums for it to function in that way. So I think for me, it's a verb. It's not a thing it's not a building that you worry about. It's a process. And I think it's an engaging process that we've all started.
Thank you, Azu. That's really, really nice. I think we almost run out of time. Liming, do you want to just give us the poll's results? So 8% strongly disagree, 10% disagree, not sure neutral 19, 50% agree, and strongly agree 13%. So thank you, everyone. And I just want to thank everyone for this amazing, just to see you has already been amazing for me. And it was truly wonderful because I think, COVID has come to reveal and to remind us of so much personally. And I acknowledge that it's really a challenging time, a difficult time for so many. It's got layers and layers of complexity. But I always feel energized listening to you group. It always makes a difference in my being. So thank you for the inspiring conversation today and for making the time to do this with us. And I just wanted to give the next webinar, which is next week at this time, is a very important topic. It is expanding access to mental health on the African continent. Please also sign up for the newsletter, which is africa.harvard.edu. And if you can, please also fill in the survey for the team of Harvard. It's a nice way to stay in contact with them. And I really thank you all again for making this time. It was wonderful to see all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.